pleasant good evening to all. A pleasant good evening to all. My name is Dr. Ochieng Springer, and I'm delighted to be the chairperson for the evening's proceedings. To start, I'd like to take a moment to recognize our distinguished guests. Her Excellency, Miss Elizabeth Inez Taylor J., Ambassador of Colombia, Embassy of the Republic of Colombia, Professor Clive Landis, Pro Vice Chancellor and Principal, the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill Campus, Professor Don Marshall, Professor of International Political Economy and Development Studies, the University Director of the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies, and our featured speaker, Mrs. June Emmanuel, wife of the late Pat Emmanuel, and members of the Emmanuel family and friends, Dr. Alana Griffith, Acting Head, Department of Government Sociology, Social Work, and Psychology, our substantive head, Dr. Christina Hines-Harrison, Dr. Christina Hines, apologies, Dr. Maisha Emmanuel, Head, Department of Clinical Sciences, and niece of Dr. Emmanuel, deans, deputy deans, heads of department, other members of the university community, including alumni and retirees, members of the family and friends of Professor Don Marshall, specially invited guests, members of the media, and our very curious and engaged students. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Tonight is always an exciting occasion for the Department of Government Sociology, Social Work, and Psychology as we host our flagship event, the Pat Emmanuel Memorial Lecture, now in its 20th iteration. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you joining us both here in person and online. This evening is especially meaningful as we are celebrating 50 years of the Faculty of the Social Sciences. This event marks a culmination of a year-long series of activities, including today's engaging conference, which brought together colleagues, past and present, and students to reflect on our achievements and future directions. A quick look at the back of your program will reveal some of the themes that have been covered in the past 19 years by our distinguished speakers, topics that reflect on deep explorations, contentions, bold interrogations, and reimaginations of our Caribbean society. Each of these lectures was inspired by the spirit of Pat Emmanuel, who was relentless in his quest to understand the Caribbean condition in his research and scholarship, and we continue to honor his work and his legacy. This evening's topic, Caribbean Development and Social Sciences, Reclaiming the Political, promises to be a stimulating and reflective one, and we are privileged to have Professor Don Marshall guide us through this important conversation. I thank you once again for joining us, and I wish us all an intellectually stimulating evening. I will now invite our principal, Professor Clive Landis, to deliver the welcome remarks.
Thank you very much, Chair Sandra Ochieng Springer. Your Excellency, Miss Elizabeth Inez Taylor J., Ambassador of Colombia. Professor Don Marshall, our featured speaker today. Alana Griffith, the Head of Department of Government Sociology, Social Work and Psychology. Mrs. June Emmanuel, wife of the late Dr. Patrick Emmanuel, and members of the Emmanuel family. Distinguished colleagues, students, and anyone watching this lecture, either in person or online. It is my great pleasure and honour to welcome all of you here to the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus tonight on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of the Patrick Emmanuel Memorial Lecture. Just looking at the programme and seeing the diverse and remarkable speakers over the last 19 years, it really is an outstanding memorial lecture series, which I think does immense credit to the family of Patrick Emmanuel and shows the respect that he is still held in today. Today, in fact, marks a double celebration for the Faculty of Social Sciences, the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the faculty and the 20th anniversary of the hosting of this memorial lecture, hosted by the Department of Government, Sociology, Social Work and Psychology. Both anniversary celebrations showcase the rich intellectual tapestry of the Faculty of Social Sciences academic journey. And here, and here tonight, we gather for what promises to be an enlightening discourse by our esteemed speaker, Professor Don Marshall. As a community of scholars, we believe in the transformative power of ideas and the impact they can have in addressing the pressing development challenges facing our country and the region. Indeed, that was the raison d'etre for the founding of the Faculty of Social Sciences half a century ago, as highlighted at this morning's plenary session reflecting on the 50th anniversary of the faculty. The power of our ideas, the knowledge that resides within our university, is ultimately translated into value for society through people. The Faculty of Social Sciences has long been blessed in this regard with true stalwarts, men and women of action, some of whom are present here tonight, who are willing to serve at all levels in society. This tradition of service fits perfectly with the campus's 2022 to 2027 strategy, themed on creating value from our ideas. This strategy seeks to leverage the campus's excellence in research in order to create value for society and value for the university itself through entrepreneurial ventures. Sometimes the value created by our researchers in society is very visible. A good example would be Professor Cynthia Barrow-Giles, who has long been recognized as a leading scholar in constitutional governance and politics. She has served on numerous electoral observer missions in the Caribbean, as well as on Commonwealth electoral observer missions into Ghana, Sri Lanka, and the Gambia. But it was when she was called upon to help safeguard Caribbean democracy as head of the CARICOM observer team for the recount of Guyana's regional and general elections in 2020, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, no less, that her expertise accrued over a career as a university scholar crystallized into value for Caribbean society that was seen and appreciated by all. Our speaker at tonight's Patrick Emmanuel lecture, Professor Don Marshall, is another stalwart who has equally contributed value in society. For example, in decades of quite unheralded work at Salises, compiling national statistics published by the World Economic Forum on micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. Longitudinal surveys of this nature allow Barbados to compare its economic performance in a standardized global database, which is critical for policymaking and evidence-based decision-making. I am intrigued by the title of Professor Marshall's lecture tonight on Caribbean development and social sciences, reclaiming the political, particularly the last three words. I would imagine that yesterday's historic visit by His Majesty Otumfuo Osei Tutu II to the Cave Hill campus will feature somewhere in today's Patrick Emmanuel lecture as an example when political action and scholarly ideas intersected. I am sure you would agree. It is a very exciting time to witness and be part of the seismic shift that is occurring in ideas and political actions, which are reshaping relations between the Caribbean and the African continent as part of a wider global reordering of political allegiances and trading relationships. As we celebrate the faculty and remember Patrick Emmanuel, let us also use this opportunity to pause and reflect on ways in which we can provide practical solutions through assistance to our regional neighbor, Jamaica, in its recovery efforts from the devastating effects of Hurricane Melissa. The Caveville campus has responded by hosting a mediathon that is taking place on this Sunday, November the 16th, 2025. Themed One Love Jamaica, the mediathon is led by the Caveville campus in partnership with UETV, Starcom, CBC, the Nation newspapers, the Red Cross, and the Department of Emergency Management. In the spirit of the late Dr. Patrick Emmanuel, a truly committed regionalist, we urge you here tonight to join us on radio or TV on Sunday by graciously offering your support for this worthy cause, as I am sure he would have. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being part of this special day. We are grateful to you for finding the time in your schedules, for helping us to make this double anniversary memorable. Please enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Professor Landis, for the welcome remarks and for setting the tone for the lecture tonight and for underscoring the importance of active scholarship in the faculty and on campus. I now wish to invite Dr. Maisha Emmanuel to give remarks on behalf of the Patrick Emmanuel family.
Chair, Her Excellency, distinguished ladies and gentlemen all, good evening to you. On behalf of the Emmanuel family, I extend heartfelt thanks to the University of the West Indies Caveville campus and the Department of Government, Sociology, Social Work and Psychology for hosting this 20th annual Patrick Emmanuel Memorial Lecture. Each year, this event provides not only an opportunity to celebrate a distinguished scholar and teacher, but also to reflect on how his ideas continue to shape the study and practice of Caribbean politics. Patrick Emmanuel was one of the region's most incisive thinkers on political development and governance. His writings explored the structures of power and representation within small island states, the tensions between democracy and dependency, and the unique paths taken by Caribbean societies as they navigated independence and regional integration. As a teacher, he brought these complex issues to life in the classroom. He challenged students to think critically about their societies and to connect theory to practice. He inspired generations of students who went on to serve across the Caribbean in public administration, academia, diplomacy, and political life. Beyond the university, Patrick Emmanuel also contributed directly to public service. During the early 1980s, he served in the government of Grenada under the leadership of Maurice Bishop, a time I remember very well. It was a time of intense political experimentation and equally intense global scrutiny. He brought to that period the same sense of intellectual rigor and principled engagement that marked his academic work. His efforts were guided by a deep belief in Caribbean self-determination, in the possibility of governance rooted in justice and participation. Even through the turbulence that followed, the tragic collapse of that government, and the US invasion of Grenada in 1983, his commitment to democratic ideals and to understanding the forces that shaped our region never wavered. His scholarship and service together reflected a lifelong dedication to understanding and improving Caribbean societies. But as we mark his professional accomplishments, we in the family remember most the man behind them. To others, he was a respected academic, a public service and a servant, and a mentor. To us, he was simply Pat, a loving husband, father, and to me and my brother and all our cousins, a dearly beloved uncle. We recall his humor, his quiet strength, sometimes not so quiet, and his generosity. We remember the warmth of his presence and the values that steadied him throughout his life. As we reflect on his life, we remember that he was not defined only by his scholarship or public service. Like all of us, he experienced triumphs and challenges, moments of clarity and seasons of struggle. He understood deeply that the work of building a just and flourishing society begins also with care for one another's well-being, not only in our public roles, but in the quiet spaces of our private lives. His life reminds us of the importance of attending to our mental and emotional health with the same seriousness that we give to our professional and intellectual pursuits. In honoring him today, we also honor the values of compassion, patience, and gentleness with ourselves and with each other. After all of these years since his passing, his absence is still felt deeply. Yet occasions like this lecture bring us comfort and pride. They remind us about his influences in the students he taught, in the colleagues he inspired, and in the ongoing debates about the Caribbean's future that he helped to shape. Thank you for continuing to honor his memory, his scholarship, and his humanity. By keeping his work alive, you help ensure that the values he stood for, curiosity, integrity, service, and compassion, continue to guide new generations. I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Emmanuel, for those heartfelt remarks. I think you beautifully captured the person that was Dr. Pat Emmanuel, his dedication, his achievements, and the legacy that he leaves. And we want to express sincere gratitude to the Emmanuel family as we continue to celebrate his work and his life. Next on our program is a brief interlude where we are going to hear a special performance from Mr. Joel Devonish.
Good night, thank you. At some point in time, I wish to interact with you. So when I do this, I want you to sing with me, all right? The young ones don't know it. They want to help me with the lyrics.
Thank you, Mr. Devonish, for such a spirited and beautiful performance. I think he deserves another round of applause. We have reached the highlight of this evening's program, the time to hear from our esteemed speaker, and I'm going to invite Dr. Pearson Broom to introduce our speaker.
Chair, Dr. Sandra Shine-Sprayer, Her Excellency Miss Elizabeth Inez Taylor-Jay, Ambassador of Colombia to Barbados, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Professor Marshall submitted a 5-line bio to us when we requested his CV and bio to build his profile. If you've known Professor Marshall for as long as I have, you'll know his essays were never short. Ask Dr. George Bell and Professor Bar Giles, witnesses to this fact. His speeches are never short. Ask his colleagues. Nor is he physically short in stature, as you'll see in a few minutes. And so that 5-line bio clearly did not encapsulate the measure of the man that he is. So we put that 5-liner aside, and this evening, it is my honor to accord my esteemed colleague the fulsome respect he deserves. It is indeed fitting that the honor of delivering the 20th Pat Emmanuel Lecture tonight should fall to him. Professor Marshall's academic career was christened in the Institute of Social and Economic Research, where he grew up and lived the experiences and the transformation of the Institute to the now Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Research. To take you back a bit, as an undergrad, we often stood by the library door waiting for it to open and would watch the intense and focus-driven Dr. Emmanuel come into the foyer of the library, take the left turn and go up the stairs to this foreboding-looking place behind the library. That was ISER. I doubt he imagined at the time that he would later carve his stellar career in the same location when he first joined as a research fellow, culminated with him as not only its director at KFIL, but the university director for all the campuses. His journey to the director and university director started with the collection of his first accolade, the Bachelor of Arts in History and Political Science, which he received with honors. Not resting on this laurel, he quickly moved on to read for his Master of Philosophy degree in Political Science from this university campus under the supervision of his mentor, Dr. George Bell. Not stopping there, the next distinguished achievement was his PhD in International Political Economy at the University of Newcastle upon Tyne in the United Kingdom. Notice I have not mentioned any years. I have no intention of dating him. This research prowess has led him to authoring and editing 3 books over the course of his career in the academy. These are Caribbean Political Economy at the Crossroads, NAFTA and Regional Developmentalism, The Empowering Impulse, The Nationalist Tradition of Barbados, and Living at the Borderlines, Issues in Caribbean Sovereignty and Development, an edited collection with Professor Bar Giles, another one of his mentors. Additionally, he has written over 10 book chapters, co-authored 8 monographs, and over 30 peer-reviewed articles in leading academic journals. He is currently the lead researcher in a regional CARICOM project on reparations, asking the foundational question, what should repair and renewal look like for each of the CARICOM member states? This evening, we will be treated to Professor Marshall's thought-provoking ideas on the topic Caribbean Development and Social Sciences, Reclaiming the Political. This lecture series aims to invoke voices that are at the forefront of their respective fields, as well as individuals whose insights and experiences inspire us to think critically and engage meaningfully with the world around us in the lineage of Dr. Patrick Emmanuel. There's a connection between these two scholars. From the anthology of lecture topics presented so far at this lecture series, there is an interlocution of both the ideas of Dr. Patrick Emmanuel and those of Professor Don Marshall, further justifying why he is the right choice for this evening's presentation. Both scholars have sought to ground their intellectual and theoretical visions on innovative interpretations around the thematic application for a renewed outlook on Afro-Caribbean relations in an uncertain global environment fraught with multiple competing and at times contradictory, if not conflicting, policy areas. Like Dr. Emmanuel's work on incentives and industrialization in the Eastern Caribbean, approaches to Caribbean integration, and governance and democracy in the Commonwealth Caribbean, Professor Marshall's body of work has also turned to industrial policy issues and the nexus to democracy and governance in the Eastern and wider Caribbean. Their foresight has seen the necessity to address the Caribbean international political economy complex over time with the express aim of highlighting where development transformation is possible via the structural opportunities to offer at specific and different temporal interstices. Fundamental to their work is a passion to understand the Caribbean development problematique in all its dimensions, with a view to reimagining alternative but sustainable futures enveloped on a variation of the age-old Leninist question, what is to be done, by whom, or for what, for African and Caribbean societies? This approach to Professor Marshall's scholarship is also fitting for the Faculty of Social Sciences that is celebrating its 50th anniversary with the rallying cry, 50 years of ideas, inquiry, and impact, reflections from the past, pioneers of future development. Of note, so ably has Don Marshall been fulfilling these academic objectives that in 2021, the university marked his advancement within the academy by according him the highest academic rank of professor, to which he deserves a round of applause. He comes to you this evening as someone who continues to keep the venerable memory of Dr. Emmanuel alive through the work of Solesis, and in his own right, as an intellectual dawn of his discipline within the academy. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you Professor Don Marshall to deliver this evening's lecture.
Greetings, everyone. Protocol has been noted, but I want to especially acknowledge Her Excellency, Miss Elizabeth Innes Taylor J., Ambassador of Colombia, Embassy of the Republic of Colombia. I also want to recognize our principal, Professor Clive Landis. I want to recognize June Emmanuel, wife of the late Dr. Patrick Emmanuel, and members of the Emmanuel family, and say hi to my colleagues, friends, students, and the men behind the cameras and the technology. Where's Mark? Schoolmate of mine. I don't see Mark. Anyway. I'll say something about Pearson a bit. But a bit about myself that's real. My heart beats 2 beats at a time. One of them is here. Stand your hands. This is my son, your hands, Deshaun Marshall. He surprised me. He surprised me because he let me know he has work to do. He's not attending. Even though I lifted the ban on the mobile phone and he had access to it. He told me he has work to do. I'll get you, Lisa. I'll get you back for this. Obviously, he had his plans and did not let me know about it, like the outfit too. Yes. Yes. Like the outfit too, my brother. The second beat is my daughter, Nia Marshall. She's not here. She is in UK. That's where temporarily she makes a living. She wants to come back home. She's a barrister. And increasingly, as she builds her client base, she keeps getting that tug between coming home and staying true to her clients. So the latest thing is that she's working with the partners of the firm to establish a Caribbean chapter of that firm. So I know she'll find a way to serve the region even more directly. But her spirit is here, and she sent some words. So those are my 2 heartbeats, but I don't dedicate the lecture to them. I dedicate it, not the 2 of y'all only. I dedicate it to one of my mentors, Dr. Patrick Emmanuel. So the part that Pearson left out is that he hinted at it. I did spend some time in the ISCR as a research assistant. My supervisor and part-time academic advisor was the late Pat Emmanuel. My colleague, Peter Wickham, would have succeeded me and took up Pat's other passion, which is polling and looking at voting and behavior patterns. I took up his passion and curiosity around the state. You see, in 1990, he wrote a work called Approaches to Governance, and he also wrote Role of the State in the Commonwealth Caribbean, 1990. And for the rest of his life, he was preoccupied about the role that the state should play in development. And we would have heard that he was a child of and a thinker during the revolution, prior to the revolution and during the revolution and afterwards. And it was difficult to work with Pat and not learn something. I don't even want to say every day, every session. Every session, I was driven to go and read because I was reminded of how little I knew. Every time I thought I had imbibed the perspectives of those I read and could converse properly with Pat, he kept interrogating that I read. So I had to humbly go and read again. And that helped me through my MPhil to the point that when I had finished my PhD, March 3rd, 1996 is when I had taken a draft to my academic supervisor at the time, and he left a message 2 weeks later in sticky tape in a little pigeonhole with my name, Mark. This thesis will fly. The first thing I did after my elation was to go and start penning acknowledgements with Pat Emmanuel's name, one of the first names that I put down. Because throughout that time, at least in the first year when I returned to do some field work in 1994, I touched base with him with some of my rudimentary ideas, and he interrogated me again, and I realized I had to go refine. So I picked up that habit of his, which is to never quite trust the things you're reading and to subject everything that passed before you to a withering critique. That was just the man. So in the final submission, he's there in the acknowledgements, and what will later become my first book, I also acknowledge him. That book came out in 1998. He would have passed some 3 years or so by then. And I also had him listed as one of my inspirational figures, and also pay tribute for my growth at that time. I'm 58 years old, Pearson. I'm not ashamed to call my age. Next year I'll be 30 years in the academy. Don't think. 30 years in the academy. And I feel good about that. Now, on to serious business. The reason why I chose this topic, Caribbean development and social sciences, is I took a deep dive into rereading Pat's Role of the State in the Commonwealth Caribbean. Coincident with reading some other work looking at coloniality, and also reflecting on some of the work that I would have done over the years. And while I am known to maintain and sustain a quarrel with imperialism as the basis upon which I write and produce, I do not come to academy in a careerist fashion to write articles and get published. I come to academy vexed, real vexed. And I like to quarrel against any vestiges of imperial authority. Anything to do with imperialism, find me there. And I find the inspiration to keep writing and writing on that theme. All right, that doesn't mean you're not to read what I write beyond just the one or two articles saying he's repeating himself all the time. No. Imperialism takes on many different forms and many different guises. So I'm inspired by Sylvia Winter, who talks about coloniality of power, coloniality of being, coloniality of knowledge, and the importance of looking at knowledge, being, and power, and try to scrub those things clean of the influence of colonialism and its legacy, right? So that, for example, and this is what I mean by reclaiming the political. Because these things, these knowledges are not innocent. Nobody produces theory or policy guide innocently. It's laced with ideas. It's laced with ideas. And you have to challenge those ideas, because there's a materiality behind those ideas that impact life chances of ordinary people. So you have to roost with the ideas. That's what makes you political. And the way social sciences has evolved at Cave Hill, let's deal with Cave Hill, the Cave Hill chapter of the UWI. A lot of it has been driven by pragmatism and funding. So you can't have a department of each discipline. And you're not at the same time to take the disciplines that fall under the roof of social sciences as disciplines cut off from the humanities, cut off from faculty of engineering, cut off from natural sciences. We are only organizing these things into academic departments and so on and faculties, all for bureaucratic convenience. You will find many scholars within the social sciences that do not operate within the strict boundaries of their training and discipline. The nature of their discipline means they have to be quite multidisciplinary. You would also find scholars in cultural studies, for example, which is housed in the Faculty of Humanities, that we find important in the social sciences to read. So like Aaron Kamagisha, I'm going to call contemporaries, because we have a habit in the academy when we're speaking about development theorizing, and anything to do with the intellectual tradition of the Caribbean, to just call the graybeards and to just call the scholars of the 1970s and 80s as if nothing happened to UWI social sciences since the heyday of Beckford, Lewis, Girvan, and so on, and nothing can be stranger to the nothing can be stranger to the truth. In fact, we do these honorable scholars a disservice by not showing the extent to which their work has inspired a new generation of ideas that contests some of the presumptions and assumptions made, but also advances the critique that began with the New World Group. Let's call them part of the New World Group. So I have sat over there and heard many people in positions of authority asking of the modern Caribbean social scientists, some of you in the room, no, not that you did that, but they're asking of the modern generation, the post-1990s group, what have you done lately? Where is the impact of your work? Why is it, has development economics, has development studies died, etc., etc. Missing, of course, the cachet of dissent against some of the modernist assumptions and some of the neocolonial fantasies that bob about in the work of some of our historical forebears, has undergone considerable critique from, say, let's start with our group of feminist scholars let's just start arbitrarily post-1990. I'm going to name names of persons who are being trailblazing. We all know our former principal, Eugene Bartow, but there are others working within and outside the Institute of Gender Nitabar Unit that have contributed to a critique of development as we understood it. Noting the blind spots and omissions, complicating our understanding of capitalism and patriarchy, complicating our understandings of the role of the state in development, taking note of the blind spots and so on. In other words, roosting with the received ideas around how we organize state, society, and economy. So, whether we're dealing with the latest PhD in Nitabar unit in Daniel Bob, or before her, I'm not dating you, Tanya and Halima, I'm not dating you guys, you ladies, I'm not dating you. But they have in their respective work, it's very difficult to do social sciences and ignore the contribution that the scholars on gender are doing. Very difficult to ignore the work of Aaron Kamagisha if you're really serious about looking at the question of overcoming coloniality. Very difficult. Now, everything is not always splendid, so I'm going to be sometimes engaging in a little bit of a difficult dialogue. Within the four square walls of our Faculty of Social Sciences, there have been some rich and valuable output in relation to the teaching mandate, the development of courses. We are marking 50 years, not just of the founding of social sciences, but the address of public policy writ large throughout the Caribbean. We take for granted that we go to banks and there are systems there that work. That we engage governments across the region and systems there work. You go into banks, you go into the public sector, elements of the private sector, and you will see persons trained out of social sciences applying their mind to the implementation and to the design of everyday life. They serve at CARICOM levels, they serve other international agencies, they serve governments, and they serve the private sector. Apart from the teaching mandate, in terms of the research and knowledge production, as I was saying earlier, there's a rich tapestry of knowledge addressing the development problematique. The newfangled is to look at the sustainable development goals and benchmark the extent to which our countries are reaching those goals, the 17 goals. But before the sustainable development goals were framed, you only have to look at the publications outreach in the last 40 years, 30 years, yes, let's say 30, 35 years. And you see every one of those goals flagged have been the subject of research outputs by the faculty. Every one of them. So whether we're looking at the question of gender and development, whether we are looking at the question of addressing poverty, questions of diversification of economies, etc., sustainable water policies, and so on, you see the contribution of social sciences and other related disciplines. What has happened, however, is that while this work has been going on, the intellectual posture, the intellectual mood has been attended by global trends, regional trends, and so on. So you have moments of quietism or periods of quietism when people are just simply publishing and getting on with what they have to get on with. But these appear only on the pages of journals. And many publics do not know what is being produced. And so publics, quite rightly, ask after the relevance of what we do. So there are periods of that because in the glorious moments of the New World Group, it was not only fashionable, it was expected that every intellectual will be a public intellectual. That the question of the viability of the nation state and the meaningfulness of regional integration would not only appear on the pages of scholarly journals and presses, but that this will be part and parcel of an expected conversation from the intellectual class inside and outside of academy. We were supposed to enjoin intellectuals outside the academy in that conversation. That was fashionable. That was expected. This was a Cold War conjuncture, after all, where ideas about what models of political economy should obtain became popular, whether it's a capitalistic model, a socialistic model, or gray areas in between the two. This was encouraged. It was fashionable, indeed, to talk about, I remember in 1988 as a student, there was a symposium on fiscal policy in the OECS countries. Professor Michael Howard, George Bell, Neville Duncan, Owen Arthur, these were the four main speakers. I was in my first year. First thing that shocked me is that these gentlemen were from different disciplines, albeit within the social sciences, speaking to fiscal policy determination, and what kind of fiscal policy should shape and direct development in the Eastern Caribbean. I found Owen Arthur most engaging from the perspective that he came with. I found Professor Neville Duncan also quite inspiring to listen to. And then entered Professor Michael Howard. I was half blown away. And then George Bell spoke last. beginning with the phrase, I'm a non-conformist Marxist-Leninist, and this is my position. I was like, what? Yes, he says, I'm a Marxist-Leninist, non-conformist, and this is my position. This is 1988, height of the Cold War. This was a kind of rhetoric. This was accepted. And he proceeded. He spoke about the historical materialist method. In other words, he spoke about the importance of historicizing development. And why it was important to give voice to the vulnerable, and why the state was important, and why the state, a state posture, mattered. That's when I realized, yeah, I'm in the right place. I should be in the university. I am dull as you get it. Dull in the sense of my consciousness was too bleak. I found myself impressed with everything I'm hearing. So I stayed the course. I gave up my job at the central bank. I was a clerical officer in central bank. Those days of tie, wearing a tie and going in Broad Street, looking dashing and debonair. And believing that I had it made. My mother used to say, there's no room in this world for being black and dumb at the same time. God rest her soul, passed away in 2019. No place in this world for being black and foolish or dumb, she would say, at the same time. We don't have that luxury. So she had a way of reinforcing that message, not directly at me, but every time she heard something that was smart or intelligent, hear ya, was a phrase she would say, I hear ya. Affirming the value of acquiring knowledge, wisdom, information, etc. You're shouting. Those are the kind of phrases. So, when I'm at home, and we're having these family discussions, I grew up in a family of eight siblings. My stepfather brought 2 children, my mother brought 3 children to the marriage, and then they had 1. Discussions during my teenage years were quite vibrant, and so the value of bringing a fresh perspective and a richness to what you say and do and so on, it was something that both my stepfather and my mother sort of affirmed or reaffirmed and so on. So the period in which debates are roosting with the ideas around development does matter. The conjuncture, the historical moment does matter. It has an impact and an influence in how members of the academy would behave. We moved from that moment that I give you an example and a snapshot of what 1988 felt like to what the early 2000s felt like. By then I'm back in the academy. I'm at the other side, I'm a lecturer. Mid-90s, for the mid-90s going into the early 2000s. And I felt the change. I felt when I spoke out, I was being called radical. My mentor, I have several. The first time I came out into the public is when I contacted Sir Hilary, who had known me from an undergrad, both on the cricket field and in his classroom as a student. So he agreed that he would introduce me, as it were, to the public. That was 1996, November. Frank Coleman Hall. I gave a lecture on globalization. Next I saw these headlines about radical. I was like, I didn't say anything radical. I didn't think I said anything radical. I said globalization is not the tide to lift all boats. That globalization is ideology. That a lot of this is about a business mantra. That this idea that through globalization you would achieve with free trade and free markets sustainable levels of development is flawed, it's wrong. History doesn't accord with that. That's a lie, a sham. That is not so much the globalization of markets as it is the marketing of globalization that we should be worried about. Because there's no singular Anglo-American route guide to development as transmitted by purveyors of neoliberal advice, the IMF, World Bank. That's how I'm talking. You see? I didn't know that was supposed to be radical. So I had to learn to live with the label. When they say radical, down with me, that was my mother. Concern for her son and what radical. You see, Hilary Beckles was radical. Understand the context. He's talking economic democracy in 1988. He's talking about economic empowerment, etc., etc. His life is being threatened. There was an article that came out in BIM. Barbados' biggest radical, Hilary Beckles. There were articles in the letters to the editor written by John Stanley Goddard and others from the ruling elite, speaking very ill of what he was doing in Queen's Park and what he was doing in the classroom and referring to him as proselytizing racial hate. That was my mom. My mom was very plugged in, you see. That was my mom's understanding of radical. How her son get radical for talking about globalization as globaloni, as ideology, as a buzzword that really is a business mantra. How did that get radical? So I had to be saying, Mommy, I think they mean that I shouldn't really criticize the IMF. That I shouldn't really call out those advisors who unwittingly perpetuate neoliberal counsel and advice, even though they have doctor behind their name, or even though they work for the venerable Central Bank or Caribbean Development Bank, that I should not refer to them as validating elites who betrayed their calling. That I shouldn't do that. I think that's what they mean when they say I am radical. It's important we reclaim the political. That is to say, it's important that we continue in our work to challenge the burden of bad ideas. If we don't do that, we are betraying our calling. This is a public, state-funded university. Yes, your hands. Taxpayers responsible for this university. Yeah? Your generation will question what we did. Where were we on the question of providing sound advice for structural transformation of our economies and societies? And they were asked after, what manner of jurisdictional elites were you? Because we are part of the elite. Hey, we sit on task forces, we sit on boards. We are seen as part of the intelligentsia. We play up to doctoral authority. There's a lot of responsibility on our shoulders. We cannot hide behind mere empirical studies because there's a political intent behind the meanings that you produce in those empirical studies. So when you say this is a depoliticized discipline or depoliticized production, I tell you, you lie. Because everything you produce constitutes a struggle for meaning capture. Everything is political. You can't get away from it. So if you're comfortable producing an economics degree, where none of your students are exposed to a basic understanding of capitalism, never exposed to a scholarly definition of capitalism, never exposed to the history of economic thought, never exposed to the contested ideas around historical capitalism. And then I see them as postgraduate students, sitting in the various courses that they are asked to sit in as they do the Masters in International Trade Policy or Masters in Development Studies. And they're coming from economics discipline, and they're looking at their counterparts and said, why is Marshall talking about historical capitalism, global capitalism? Why is he talking about capitalisms, S, plural? Why is he talking about globalizations? Why is he historicizing globalization and globalizations? What is he teaching? This is not what it was taught. Why is he speaking as though we should already know that everything that we've been taught about the history of capitalism and the first industrial revolution and so on, why is he speaking as though those things are fictions? Well, I'll answer that by saying this. I have been at pains sitting down at faculty board meetings. I sat down in faculty board meetings for a long, long time. I was around when? You know there's a calypsonian that say I in town too long? I was in town as a research assistant, albeit invited to faculty board. No, first I was working for the Guild. I was a Guild representative. I sat at faculty board and heard the late Wendell McLean in full cry. Christina, colleagues in social sciences, we have it really nice in social sciences. Wendell McLean was a tour de force. He's a stalwart that helped blaze a trail in the founding of our Faculty of Social Sciences. He was an economist. He had his own idiosyncrasies, as we all do. It takes a little bit of craziness to get up and decide you're going to do a PhD anyway, or that you're going to engage in scholarship. A little bit of craziness. But he was thorough, he was meticulous, and he asked that we follow process and so on. But I have been in the faculty where I've seen economics evolve from a discussion of Arthur Lewis, his import, impact, his ideas, and the critique of the New World Group and so on as part and parcel of how you would teach economics, to one where the mathematics of the discipline has been valorized as the best way in which one should proceed. I also saw the celebration of technique over detail. Things that were relegated to Arthur Lewis footnotes have become part of the main text, the mathematics, the modeling, the algebra, etc. I'm going to speak frankly. And while it is useful that we have many people under the sun, those trained in regression analysis, those trained in growth theory, etc. While it is useful to have many different perspectives within a discipline, encourage, train, and so on, we must never lose sight of the need to have courses introducing students to the critical to critical analysis. Critical analysis. That's all I'm saying. Because what would happen is that you would get a first-class honors graduate in economics, versed in the mathematics of the discipline, well schooled in espousing your liberal counsel, but have no understanding whatsoever about what capitalism, global capitalism, is about, outside of narrow definitions around supply and demand, etc., etc. Worse, outside of foundational courses that may teach you about the difficult and different historical and institutional starting points of Caribbean societies and economies, if you're not immersed with an understanding of your own local circumstance. So that, for example, C.R.R. James lets us know that the first historical appearance of a West Indian middle class is around after the 1940s. Let's just start with that, right? This market liberal construct that you're talking about and discussing presumes that you have a society where there's some kind of sophistication in relation to class development. In other words, there's a cadre of ready and willing and available entrepreneurs, well-heeled to take risks. But enterprise culture in our parts is quite conservative for a particular reason, all to do with historical emergence, late historical emergence of a West Indian middle class. So we are what? 2-3 generations removed from a people without a historical middle class. I hope you pick up what I'm saying. So when you're beginning to talk about entrepreneurship and allowing for entrepreneurial expression, entrepreneurial freedom, that is useful, that is valuable, but in the Caribbean development context, you have to begin to be discussing a role of a development bank, a role of a state, microfinance, in terms of state-based credit, microcredit, lending, and so on. You have to start to think about the peculiarities and the characteristics of your own domestic circumstance, and do not begin to believe that you're imagining the Caribbean as little European countries in waiting. These are not sleeping beauties awaiting a kiss of the right policies to then emerge fully formed, ready to compete with sharp elbows against others. You know, that's not going to work. You're going to need a degree of state intervention, which brings me now more concretely to the importance. The second point I want to make in this lecture is the importance of state posture. Caribbean development, given, as I said, the very different historical and institutional starting points, and I refer to the colonial legacy, I refer to the legacy of chattel slavery, etc., requires a level of intervention from the state, both at the level of welfare, but why I emphasize state posture, to overcome the vexing issue of limited diversification, and industrial policy becomes very necessary. Now, I've made this argument elsewhere on the pages of different journals, etc., but why I'm flagging it now is that as we bring politics in, as we reclaim the political, as we bring politics in, I want to address a particular vexing situation that faces the Caribbean today. Grenada, Jamaica, Barbados, let me just take these three, have been, up to recently, been part of IMF programs. There's a well-intentioned spirit that drives our engagement with the fund. It's all to do with financial sector enhancement. It's all to do with improving the capacity to have an effective tax administration policy, effective revenue collection policy, and so on, and capacity. It's about modernization and digitization of government services, and to ultimately ensure that all those fetters to business development are removed in order to facilitate what business persons would call an ease of doing business. And you need to finance that, and so on. The problem, however, with the engagement with the fund in this new age, because, you know, the fund has evolved over time as it faced more and more legitimacy crises. As it continues to face legitimacy crises, staffers in the fund and the World Bank have been trying to modernize and address the kinds of interventionist measures that they recommend, and austerity measures, or rather, and measures that they believe that could help assist countries to modernize and so on. The problem with it is when it's not met with an appropriate statecraft, when it's not met with an appropriate state response, when the state posture is not developmental, this is what happens. You access loans, the macroeconomic criteria is applied, one of which is that you are to reduce government spending and try to achieve fiscal surpluses, which is, in layman terms, means if you earn $100 as an economy and the cost of running society and economy is $250, you have to work assiduously to bring down that deficit of $150 extra, bring it down by curtailing your spending and so on. Because every time you raise money through issuing coupons like treasury bills and so on to close that gap, you are making your debt, it's hitting your debt servicing capacity in a way that is not sustainable. So, in the short to medium term, you should pare down your spending and cut that urge to rely on central bank financing, which I just described as merely floating a bond, an IOU, for subscribers, institutional and individual, to buy those coupons like hotcakes. Some people call it printing money, but it's not literally printing money. The problem is not the advice in itself. I want you to understand something. The advice, the fiscal advice about the need to be more prudent and to undergo a fiscal correction on its own makes sense. However, if your economy are marked by the following characteristics: high import bill in relation to food, fuel, medicine, it means you've got a structural challenge to overcome. Food, fuel, medicine. That's what's your high import bill. Then you've got to provide a protective response for vulnerable groups. So your expenditure for providing welfare, let's put it like that, is high. So you got high imports that take up foreign exchange, food, fuel, medicine. And then to keep social stability, to maintain social stability, you have to maintain a welfare state that provides certain social services and so on, just to keep people on an even keel, means that you're spending more than you're earning. I've just described basically the challenges Jamaica, Grenada, Barbados experience more or less, okay? This is the kind of predicament they face. Now, there are nuances because Jamaica has some natural resources, so they do you would say that they have a greater diversified expression, but ultimately they're in the same kind of predicament that, say, Barbados without those kind of natural resources also face. And then there's also the overhang of being in an IMF program for about nearly 50 years. Okay? So let's just note that. At some point, you have to call it as you see it. How is that relation working out for you? That relationship with a development partner, or so you believe, that is telling you, A, you have to curtail your expenditure when all historical episodes of long-run sustainable development begins with state expenditure. You have to run a deficit. There's no getting away from it. There's no getting away from the state being the theater of accumulation, the theater of development. There's no getting away from it. There's never happened in history that mere markets drove sustainable economic development for countries. Never happened. China takes advantage of an open world economy, representative of the cosmovision of neoliberals. They do take advantage, and it has been responsible for their long-run growth. But there is a lot of state going on. There's a lot of state and private sector marriages and relationships forged. So every time I say state intervention, as that state posture mean, I do not mean the political class of politicians and career civil servants bossing the economy. That will be a bastardization of what I'm talking about. I am talking about the state working hand in glove with enlightened elements of the private sector and ensuring with many publics a certain vision of where they would like to see the society and economy go. So there is a sort of interlocking understanding by a variety of elites, sharing broad principles of where the vision should be, what is it you're targeting, etc., etc. If you're not in a value-added industrial deepening strategy, then you cannot overcome the blights of that limited economy that I just described. An economy heavily reliant on the sale of one or two cash crops, on the sale of one or two natural resources, on tourism, but can't overcome the drag of a high import bill associated with food, fuel, medicine, and the drag of trying to maintain social stability through welfare. Okay? It means you have to, as a state, as a society, as students, insist on asking the question, what is the value-added development strategy that you have in place to overcome the blights of the colonial past? Because the colonial past delivered this legacy to us. These lopsided economies, these monocrop societies, these monosector-driven economies. We didn't create this. This is the legacy of the colonial upbringing. Arthur Lewis said we need reparations. 1939. Repeated it in 1950 in his essay, Industrialization of the British West Indies. Economists are silent today on it. I'm just saying. The campaign for reparations, find a number of historians, political scientists, progressives. I haven't heard any economists. Just saying. But the first and only black man with a Nobel Prize in economics, he said it. He said it. He was not afraid to be political in that regard. But the urgent task of rebuilding societies and economies in the direction of a greater diversification does turn on the question of state posture. What is the posture of the ruling regime in relation to its engagements with elements of the private sector pockets of civil society? What is this relationship in relation to the bargains with international creditors, foreign direct investors, and local investors? These are the questions that attend to how you would critique the development mission and thrust of a particular country. You have to ask the question of the state. What exactly is going on? So what does the history tell you in the last 5 minutes? What does the history tell us? The history tells us that those countries where there's clear evidence of a developmental vision, pathway, etc., invariably, at various historical moments, achieve sustainable levels of development and some degree of transformation, provided there's coherence across sectors, consensus across a variety of elites, a compelling vision, and yes, some element of, this is controversial, state compulsion. Now, I don't say that easily. I'm assembling what the history tells us, right? I just said some element of state compulsion. So the so-called newly industrialized, they were newly industrialized. Southeast Asian countries, you look at their history, when they rose, and you saw that there was a high degree of authoritarianism. You look at Singapore under Lee Kuan Yew, you find that this is not only a stable government, but he had managed to neuter his political enemies, albeit within a liberal democratic framework. And I'll put inverted commas around neutralize. Neuter or neutralize. I should say neutralize his political enemies. But you could do like Barbados and St. Vincent. You could have a 3-star, 4-star, 5-star general. Hey. And then you could ask the question, to whom much was given, what happened? What did you do when you controlled and managed through a tremendous display of rhetorical talent to persuade the population to stay the course? What has been the developmental effect of that? Has Barbados's fundamental economic outlook changed? Is it likely to change? For 7 years is too quick, so let's be fair. Are we seeing green shoots of a structural transformation sufficient to encourage us to believe that there is an attenuation, a coming attenuation of our high dependency on mass-based tourism and international banking services, financial services, sorry? Is that about to change? Can Arobaro wake up tomorrow morning and within a half hour look around and say, this place looks familiar, I know how to run it? I wasn't around since 1987, but 40 years later, I pretty much know what to do when I get into the seat of government. It looks familiar. The political economy still looks familiar. So what has happened since 1987? So don't just focus on this government. In between there was a 14-year government. Then there was a 10-year one. So there'll be some substantial mandates. But to what effect? What is the developmental effect of these mandates that exceed 5-7 years? And we can ask that of Jamaica, and we can ask that of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, etc., etc., etc. I remember when I saw the phrase 5-star general, I stoops. We set the bar so low, so low for our political class. You mean you're just winning elections? You mean regime consolidation politics is the only thing we're reclaiming? That's the politics that we're reclaiming? The art of being a Machiavellian? I have political science colleagues, who I will not name, who've made Machiavelli I do this thing as a soul craft, right? Statecraft has to be something developmental. I don't want to hear about how you machinations in power. To what end? Of course regime survival is important. I would be the first to say to any prime minister, watch your back. But it has to be a means towards a developmental end. If not, you're just serving the ego. But we set the bar so low, that we celebrate how much times a political leader wins an election. 5-star general. Hope he lose. On the basis that there's something pointless about according success to a political regime on the basis of their capacity to win an election. Has to be more than that. Have to be serving something. Now, mind you, if I had a conversation with Prime Minister Gonzalez, Prime Minister Motley, each one of them, as I've had from time to time, and we engage questions about the developmental challenge, I have to be fair. They would outline the kinds of difficulties that they face as small, open economies and navigating the tempests out there. So don't think that I'm standing here making it look like it's an easy thing to do. Because even as you may defy the fund, you've got credit rating agencies who come every 3 months to make an assessment based on bad methodology on your debt, on your capacity to service your debt, and so on. Bad methodology. They combine quantitative assessments with interviews and then come up with a metric, a quantitative metric. Anybody doing statistics at UE and try that nonsense get 0. We don't even triangulate like that. You can't be mixing up your methodologies like that. You would ask, Professor Landis alluded to the work that Solis has commissioned in relation to surveys that would feed into the World Economic Outlook. What is the methodology? The methodology is based on interviews of leading about 50 businesses. You get the opinions, it's called an executive opinion survey. So the business managers, the CEOs, and so on, we have to beg them. My colleague, Jonathan Lashley, sometimes has to go to lunch with them just to get them to fill out the form. You have to beg them. We use the technology. But when they finish page 1, hit page 2, and see you're only 10% through the form, they're not filling out anymore. So we try to simplify this form. The point I'm making, it is a qualitative assessment. We don't finish it, receive the data, and then put a metric, a ranking. No. There's no numerical anything that follows that. It is an executive opinion survey. But you have credit rating agencies, and you see this thing about coloniality of being, of power, and of knowledge. We have to be very careful. We have interlocutors coming from different places, with their mixed up methodologies and mixed up ideologies, making a judgment, and then we put it on the headline in our social media posts and in the mass media, whatever it is that they trot out. So this thing about when you see Barbados has been downgraded, while you take it seriously because it is a hit on our capacity to borrow cheaply, don't take it that seriously in relation to ask questions about the methodology. A lot of them are making political judgments. If you happen, in my conversations with these leaders, I tell you, if you happen to disagree with a major policy demand of, say, the fund or the bank, there are repercussions for when the credit rating agencies undertake a rating. Now, they do these ratings whether you invite them or not. The same IMF in their annual reports will suddenly give you a negative outlook. I remember the late Prime Minister Oenatha regaled me with a story of a downgrade by Moody. He got on the plane and went to headquarters, Moody, to have a conversation. All because, I didn't agree with the policy, but I told him I agree with him. Anyway, in a previous budget, he had earmarked a certain amount of hectares of land to pursue agricultural development in the previous budget. 2 years later, he sort of backed away from that to do something else and then justified it by saying, if we grow our economy, we will have the means to import what we want. Okay. Richard Francis, that's the name of the person that was behind Moody's, came, made an assessment, said Barbados should not be involved in food self-sufficiency. But as I told you, the then Prime Minister has shifted course in the course of 2 years. 2 years prior, he was into the food self-sufficiency. 2 years later, he just slightly moved off of that. But Francis didn't read the last document. So, in his view, Barbados should not pursue food self-sufficiency. So in 2006, what does he do? Makes a bad report, casting doubt on the government's strategy and so on and so on and so forth. And he was livid. So he went to, but this was the nature of the man. This was the nature of his activism. This is how he took seriously the question of state posture, by the way. He took seriously the question of the role of the state. So we need to, it's important to bring politics in when we are looking at Caribbean development. You cannot escape it. It's also important in the field of social sciences for intellectual workers serving the academy, because I can understand intellectual workers serving other organizations. They have to attend to tasks and duties that we don't necessarily have to attend to because we can think of paradigms. They have to think about policies right there now. But it's important that the intellectual class working within the academy roosts with ideas, challenge prevailing assumptions, knowing that their work is always political. It's never neutral in that sense. It's always political. Where there are gaps, highlight those gaps. If it's a consultancy, you frame how you respond to the terms of reference of that. Because ultimately, you're a scholar asked to do a consultancy. You're not a consultant doing a consultancy. You're a scholar. Don't betray that calling. And that would be to honor those that have walked before us. That would be to honor the Gervins, the Bells, the Beckfords, the Andrew Downs and others, the Eugene Bartels, it would be to honor them if we remain true to our scholarly vocation, our scholarly calling, even as we are asked to serve governments, sit on private sector boards, sit on task forces. You are asked to sit there as a scholar, not as a member of the validating elite. And that is my simple message today. It has been a pleasure. I feel very honored to have the opportunity to come here and stand before you and deliver. Those that know me know very well that I have 2 other theses in here, but I chose to tell this particular kind of story today. I'm obliged. Why would you talk so long if I do that? You would talk. So you should tell me everything. You coming?
Thank you very much, Don, for what I thought was a very impassioned and what I thought was a very thought-provoking lecture. And I like that you use a personal lens to speak about knowledge as never being neutral. You spoke about the importance of historicizing development. And the role of the state in the development process. Actually, I was speaking to my students about this just this week. You spoke about, I appreciated that you critically examined the evolution of the academy, and you highlighted the critical intellectual tradition of the Caribbean. And then you made a call for a normative approach to development. But we're going to open the session to some questions from our audience in person. And those who are watching online, you can type your questions in the chat. We'll take 2 rounds of 2 questions each. So feel free to walk to the mic if you have any questions. The mic is not on.
All right, I don't know if I have to throw my voice or somebody is going to turn on the mic. Me? Should I throw my voice? Okay, I think everybody can hear me. I think my voice is pretty loud enough to get to Dr. Brathwaite. I promise not to ask you anything about blockchain technology today, Dr. Marshall. I don't know. Are you familiar with the movie Enemies at the Gate? Huh? Enemies at the Gate? Familiar with that movie?
Go ahead.
Okay, it's a movie about the battle for Stalingrad, when the Germans were the enemies at the gate of the Russians, yeah? Well, I wrote a short editorial in The Nation a couple years ago, and I suggested that the IMF, the World Bank, and the Financial Action Task Force were enemies at the gate, yeah? And it's based entirely on research over the last 8 years, because we have seen both the World Bank and the IMF introduce their own policies on governments and shape the policies of the government and influence the policies of the governments based on the consideration you want our loan. So Argentina was looking at doing something similar to El Salvador, and the World Bank said, you want our loan? Well, you can't go in that direction. El Salvador was moving in a certain direction, right? And this year, I think it was this year, earlier this year, the IMF told them, you're moving in that right direction. Well, very sorry, you got to cut back this, you got to cut back that, you got to cut back this, or you're not getting our loan, right? So I still think there's enough evidence for me to say that the IMF and the World Bank and the Financial Action Task Force, which I don't think governments understand, are really qualifying and demonstrating that they are enemies at the gate. Any thoughts, sir?
Well, all I would say is that in keeping with how I look at imperialism, the reason why I speak out against imperialism in all its forms is because imperialism ultimately is about a denial of development. I want you to just know that. Imperialism ultimately is about a denial of development. It rests on this idea that a sufficient number of countries are supposed to accept its excess capital and its excess goods, and these countries at the periphery are supposed to, as it were, make available to these countries raw materials and cheap sources of labor and so on and so forth. But we know that throughout history, people resent and resist imperialism. Yeah? So quite often, if you find that these global governance institutions that the IMF or World Bank sort of accord with an imperial way of being, then you know, the back of your head, okay, this is about a denial of development. So then you could take them on. Now, at the same time, I don't want us to be so expressly ideological that we miss that within the IMF and within the World Bank, there are persons who take their craft seriously. As scholars, as thinkers, as policy professionals, they take what they do seriously. So you will find that you can meet kindred spirits within those organizations that do not share some of the assumptions approved by the board in Washington. All right? So I often tell students, be careful. The IMF is a political organization. But within the organization, there's a contestation of viewpoints. So let me give you one classic example. The Prime Minister of Barbados, quite rightly, under Burke 2.0, referred to the role of the resilience and, there's a fund that the IMF had. It's a resilience and something fund. Anyway, it was an avenue for countries that want to adopt climate mitigation to seek to source that funding. This year, under MAGA, following the closure of USAID, the U.S. Secretary of State declares, you see that fund that we had for climate resilience, to assist with climate resilience, climate mitigation, we're closing that off. So it means there are persons that have been working, producing something called IMF staff papers. These are rich publications that would have made the point of the role that the fund should play in assisting countries at this time in terms of combating climate change. And so a credit facility was established to so help. But now we hear this year, 2 months ago, a month ago actually, that facility closed off. So just remember that the IMF is a thinking organization, that there's always scope for negotiation, but ultimately there's some fundamental assumptions that they have about development that we must challenge because it doesn't quite fit our space. Sorry for being so long.
Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Prof. It was a pleasure to hear you. It's good to see you as well. Cheers. So my question.
Here comes the bomb.
My question, and you touched on it just now in your response. I have two questions, actually. The first one is, what are we talking about when we say Caribbean development here? Especially for me, in the time in which we are living, there is so much discussion about climate change, technology, social justice, and injustices. I wasn't very clear from your talk about how these things mesh with your talk. So that's one. That's the first one. The second one is on the topic of reparation, which you touched in your talk as well. And I have to say I was very entertained by all the five-star general talk. When we get the reparation, who is administering these funds? The same generals and all of these individuals and groups that you are so critical of. And it really connects back to the first question about what is the meaning of development and how it connects to social justice, climate, and all of these other things. Thank you.
So you're correct in saying that definition of terms is important. So in looking at Caribbean development, the aspect that I focus on tonight was looking at such socioeconomic transformation in the direction of a more robust diversification. Let me see if I can put that a different way. I looked at the fact that we have to overcome our limited diversification as a necessary development objective. But I do take your point. We have to settle the question of what should development in the Caribbean look like? Should it be about justice as well as paramount? I mean, you have scholars of Marta saying that sees development as justice. You have others that look at development and say, well, the object, given our history about development, should be about how should we overcome coloniality? How should we overcome the legacy of colonialism? And that could be an objective of development from these parts. Okay? So overcoming that legacy can be an objective in these parts. I'm very much aware of how powerful the ideology of development, aka progress, aka economic growth. I am aware of the pitfalls of that kind of narrow kind of way of treating to development. That is, if you have sustainable growth and if your country has all the trappings of late modernity, then that equals progress. That has been much critiqued, and that is not what it was really addressing. So today, I have limited, reduced, work with a very limited conception of development, admittedly, which was to deal with the question of pushing past a limited diversification. That was all I was doing, because I do believe that it's important to build up the potential, the production potential of an economy and society, because I don't delink the two. The economy is embedded into society. So every time we talk about industrial deepening of the economy, we really mean industrial deepening of the society. Every time we talk about diversification, we don't really mean diversification of the economy per se. We mean the diversification of the society, because it gives a new lease on life for new talents, it improves life chances for people, etc., etc. So I do accept that the first part. The second part, not that it's a simple answer I'm going to give you, but in the work that we are doing on reparations, what about it? On reparations, we do not conceive two things. The work is not about, and we respect, but it's not about a paycheck. Okay, so this work that we do is about infrastructure projects that can bring about a structural transformation of these economies away from our governments having to rely on loans that racks up debt. So the infrastructural expansion and modernization that we necessarily need, that is being debt financed, we are saying really should be part and parcel of drawing a blank, a reparations kind of endeavor. That this really should be a reparations endeavor, but it does not exhaust the whole question of reparatory justice, because we have to address the trauma, the harm, etc. This aspect that we're looking at is saying, why should we have to pay our way through debts for the infrastructure modernization of these regions when you didn't, at the time of independence, give us reparations to so assist with that? But it does not exhaust the question that they gotta pay. They gotta pay beyond just a question of infrastructural modernization. So this is a modest ambition in the sense that it's just limited to that agenda. But the larger question of the reparations obligation to families, to the indigenous people, to the indentured servants, this remains on the cards. This remains on the cards. And in that research, the Maroon community and First Nation peoples, Garfunas, Tanos, etc., we didn't get to speak to them en masse as groups. We spoke to some of them in focus group discussions. So the research does not pretend to address their needs in that sense. All it does is just simply try to get from these different groups what they imagine transformation should look like and the kinds of projects they believe that can make a difference.
Thank you, Prof. Are there any other questions from the audience in person? Because we don't have any online. I can see Kolisha.
These are your students, you set them up to do?
Yeah.
I hope you don't have any hard questions.
I didn't set them up to do.
Is this your essay question? Go on.
Good night. Okay, I have two questions.
Sure.
So are we really reclaiming the political or reclaiming the illusion of political, given the structural compulsion often limits the scope of actual choice for Caribbean governments? That's one. And also, based on your lecture, given the Caribbean's insertion into the global financial and also the tourism context, can the region meaningfully reclaim political autonomy, or are we trapped or locked in what is called governance without government? Thank you.
These sound like your essays, you know.
No.
You know, these
It's not
sound
my
like
essay
somebody took
question.
some tutorial questions and thing and form it. Y'all sound bright, boy. Okay. The illusion. Is it illusional? This thing about the political. Well, I did say earlier that, you know, small island states are faced with limits of choice in relation to maneuver, but that doesn't mean that they should not engage in coalitions with other countries sharing similar features, similar demands, in order to better negotiate their own circumstance, you know, alleviation from their own circumstances. Look, I know it's difficult for us to believe this, but agency matters. The kind of bargains that you engage matter. The bargains you engage in the international political economy matter. So you, every day, like I tell my students in reading for the international trade policy, it's not just trade that we engage in, that we bargain. We are bargaining every day with foreign investors. We are bargaining with other agencies that have a perception of where we are, what we should be doing. We're engaged in negotiations every day. And so agency matters, and you shouldn't, because you're a small country or small island state with certain limitations and so on, believe that you don't have economies and societies of scope for which you should bargain aggressively. I think our weakness comes from the fact that we quite don't know where we're going. We don't know where we're going developmentally. So we end up bargaining for more tourism lift, more airline lift. We bargain for more cruise ships. These are the kinds of things that we do. So you will hear a minister proudly saying, new airlift coming out of Ghana, new airlift coming out of XYZ and so on, because it accords with how we developmentally have shaped where we're going. And rather than that airlift being celebrated as an opportunity to get into markets, to do other things, and to have other people taste our plus, which is a unique beverage. I don't care where you go in the world, it's not quite a soft drink, like a plus. You know what I mean? Have you tasted a plus anywhere else in the world? Anything like it? Like it? I've tasted Mobby different places, so I wouldn't claim. But you see plus, a Bajan plus, there's no other drink in the whole wide world that tastes like plus. But I'm just giving you an example. There are things that we can do, and so on and so forth. The second question, I don't know if I do justice to that. The second question, give me the last few words you said in that question. Something about governance? Oh, the governance without government. There's no power vacuum out there, you know. I know there's this argument that, and God forbid we don't move away from the political side of the nation state and create some, and there's some world state. No, we're not going there. But there's this idea that there's governance without government. Let's take a step back. The race is on now in this moment to establish the new norms that will settle the emerging world order. The BRICS are, different countries in the BRICS are trying to shape what the new norms would be. United States, as it tries to wrestle and overcome declining empire, declining influence, and how to fix an economy riddled and bogged down by the fact that it will not close any of those 750 military bases serving 80 countries. That's the United States' problem. Sorry to reduce it to that. But if you're running a big empire, you got to wear some empire big pants. You want to maintain 750 military bases across 80 countries and still balance the books? And still compete with China? And still compete with their others? It can't work. So this is why the truth about, in the literature, about a decline of the United States and a decline empire, that's also true. And they're dragging the United Kingdom with them because the United Kingdom quite doesn't know what to make of its loss of empire. So it hugs up the United States in this special relationship, but the love fest is not impressing anybody because we are in the midst of witnessing an eastward shift of influence and dominance. It's heading Southeast Asia. That's where it's going. But Brazil, Russia, India, Japan do not rule out Japan. This year declared the largest military defense spending and so on. You thought that China's display of military hardware 2 months ago was to impress the United States? No, that was a shot across the bow to Japan. Just keep that in mind. The emerging world order is being contested right now, and the norms being promoted right now are coming from various centers of authority, various centers of various countries as well, various universities. They're playing that role. South Africa, Brazil, Russia, India, China, they're all participating in that. United States and happens to be in this moment of madness of which is the Trump quake, is all over the place with it. They're losing out in global leadership. They're responding aggressively militarily, and for them, for United States, the world order just needs rebalancing through a militarized response. And the militarized response is based on a hawkish element within Washington that does believe that with the control of Venezuela, it settles the question of the access to a major oil fill-up. So it means that in terms of the international political economy of oil and oil supply, game over. Because once you control Venezuela, then it means the Saudis no longer have that kind of over, and those in the Arab world no longer have that kind of dominance. The game will be tilted back to United States in terms of geostrategic and geopolitical importance. That's how it's settling the question of the emerging, of the challenge to its dominance. But the point I'm making is that when we put on the agenda reparations, when we put on the agenda climate justice, these constitute ideas to help shape the new norms that will settle part of the emerging world order. So we have to continue to engage in these solidarity communities in building momentum around ideas of this nature. Ultimately, you can't rule, no world power can rule by a bayonet or by by force. They also need ideas. They also need energizing ideas to win over many converts and so on. So never mind the militarized response of the United States. Ultimately, they can, in order to enjoy a resurgence in their fortunes and so on, they need to be part and parcel of leading ideas, leading norms, emerging norms that most of the world's community will accept. So world order constitutes the government, let me put in inverted commas, the prevailing dominant ideas that will shape the international political economy for quite some time to come. So we should be entrenched and be part of that battle. This is why nominally I found it interesting that Barbados has put forward the Bridgestone Initiative. We know the limitations of that, but I think it's important to get into this business of trying to establish norms, new norms. But we all know the limitations of that because you're going to the status quo and asking them to stamp up some cash, and we don't know if that would work, but you've got a conversation going.
Thank you, Prof. I don't see any other. Oh, George, you have a question?
Personally, talking too much? Am I talking too much? Am I talking too much? My answers are too loud? Keep me honest.
Go ahead, George.
Yes, Prof.
Yes, my comrade from Newcastle.
Yes, we.
I walked into listen, George was at Newcastle University. He would have heard of me being there before. George is busy doing his PhD. It's a typical day, English summer. George is listening to brass stats. You know, George has his he has a liking for a particular political party, but we'll go there.
I love all political parties.
I'm chairman of a particular board, and normally people associate that a chairman pick normally is a party pick. So, you know how it goes. We were getting into all that. I accepted a job. I accepted a job that I had difficulties with intellectually. And it was Sir Hilary that told me, man, never mind that PM Arthur asked you to be his advisor on something. Treat it as professional. And I was comfortable with that. Government change. I asked to sit on a board. I gone to England, his sabbatical. I got to find out where George was, where he was hiding, doing his own work. So I gone into his cave, right? I turn up behind George. I can hear brass tacks. This is Kristen, you know what I'm talking about? A radio program called Brass Tacks. So I can hear these strong Bajan voices. I said, look, George. So when George saw me, he was like he saw a ghost. And then I reacted like I saw a ghost. George tells me, don't you know the people that I'm the chairman of this, it was the Sanitation Service Authority. Do you know that the sanitation workers are on strike? I'm like, what? So I'm overseas and not knowing that there's fire at my home, virtually. Anyway, George, sorry about that. And that is something I wanted to share with the public.
No, actually,
and he was a good. He advised me well. Never mind, he thought I was a dem.
It was one of those moments that I'll always cherish and remember. Yes, because when you knocked on the door and I said come in without even looking back. Right. So when I did, that was when I was shocked. Don, you spoke in terms of the IMF and the World Bank and the fact that while they may give prudent advice to governments, behind that veneer, there's the political motive, political agenda, which ultimately beats out the very ideas that emerge from within those institutions. Given what has been going on now with COP30, And the fact that we have a Caribbean Development Bank and CAF working together, recognizing the plight of Caribbean small island developing states and the pressures we face in terms of resilient financing, etc., and being able to mitigate some of the vagaries of climate change. To what extent do you think that we also need, I know they are already working with and through the University of West Indies, but to what extent do you think now that there has to be a stronger political drive within the context of the region now and within the public sphere of the region, not just among the leaders or the leadership and culture and perhaps the leaders that got to alter some of the culture that keeps us riveted to the past, that they can bring about the sense of international primacy and the very thing that you were speaking about when Afro used to use it in the words of nimbleness and being able to maneuver rough waters. To what extent do you think that there has to be a stronger influence? Yes, they're working with us, but what are we doing in terms of public knowledge and public advocacy in recognizing that they too have a role to play, but it can only be played in sync with the general public, and hence you need that buy-in.
Climate change is bourgeois. When people are faced with cost of living challenges, when people are faced with mere survival, these topics that are sensitive to us, I think, this is my guess, I think they cede to the leadership those things that they believe the leadership is skilled at handling at the global level. But you see the cost of living, fix that. You see rising crime, fix that. You see levels of poverty, fix that. I think if there's one thing that the Trump quit teaches us is, and the us here, I'm going to treat everybody here as progressive. We seem to forget that people have some basic needs that need to be addressed. And then there are some issues that, if you're not addressing their issues, we cede ground for reactionary forces to capture that constituency with a populist kind of neoconservative rhetoric. So the point I'm making is this. Jamaicans right now will be concerned about climate change because of the impact of Melissa. They make the connection between these freak storms and so on and the need for climate mitigation. That message, in this moment, will get through. It's not going to hit Barbadians that way. I'm talking about the nitty-gritty. It's not going to hit the nitty-gritty that way. Not that they're not thinking about it, but the lawless gun crime, that's a priority. That needs to be addressed. The fact that Barbados is ranked number 7 in the world in terms of the most expensive destination to live. Number 7, yes. Number 7. And there are 194 countries. We're ranked number 7. That's something, we cannot treat that as lowbrow and the climate change thing as highbrow. That's the problem that we progressive, we don't listen to the people. The people want that fixed. They want price gouging fixed. They want the stranglehold of merchant capital addressed. They ain't going to put it like that, of course. But they want the sufferation to done. And what we do is we look at how many shows that they're attending and that Beijing's got enough money and they're going to spend money on Christmas. We are rude. If they spend their rent, and making sure they get a good Christmas, that's how they're living. But they believe that we are to tackle the high cost of living. We are to tackle lawless crime. And sexual violence against women and children. We are to tackle that, a major scourge. What are we doing about them things? Every year you got Life in Leggings, you got marches against violence against women, but it's more ritualistic. We are not listening to people on the ground. They want that fix. They want that address. This ends up being a bourgeois conversation we are having about climate change and climate mitigation and cop this and cop that. No disrespect. But that's not sexy to them. That's not immediate to them. I'm just saying, you know.
Okay.
Then your voice is drowned up at the bottom. So that is why I'm putting in the context of two development like CAF and CDB vis-a-vis whatever advice we can get from the external without necessarily having them pay the same attention to us or lack of attention that we've got from the IMF.
My last word. Our mutual friend, he's still with us, Oinatha. He had a way of saying, face it and fix it. You face it and fix it also apply to those things that people might not ordinarily speak about. And so for him, the question of climate change, the leadership, face it and fix it. The question that people have uppermost in their minds and want to address, we have to face it and fix it as well.
All right, thank you so much for your stimulating questions. And thank you, Don, Professor Barshall, for an enriching conversation. Don't go as yet. I want to invite Dr. Brathwaite to present some tokens of appreciation from the department.
You want to receive these from me? You all right? You too slow.
Once again, very provocative, inspiring words of wisdom. You know, this is one thing I love about Don. He gives it real and he gives it with a feel, whether you agree or disagree with him. Don, on behalf of my students, the staff, the principal, and on behalf of the family of Pat Emmanuel, we thank you and we really appreciate the lecture. Very stimulating and inspiring.
Thank you very much.
Ideas stuff.
Yes, ma'am. More? I could go now?
Yes, you can. Thank you. We'll present a token to Mrs. Emmanuel. I will now invite Dr. Pearson Broom to deliver the vote of thanks and closing remarks.
Chair, Your Excellency, and Professor Clive Landis, we've reached the end of the 20th edition of the Patrick Emmanuel Memorial Lecture. But before we conclude, Professor Marshall raised an interesting question, pretty much that was tackled today in the plenary session, dealing with the idea of the epistemological foundations of the Academy. Clearly, it is being challenged. In your view, then, how do you retrofit the foundations of the Academy to respond to the challenges that we currently face? Today, there was a clarion call, for example, for more interdisciplinary work. More work, for example, to integrate ideas in order to tackle the challenges that we face. But then the structure of the Academy, for example, obfuscates that. How do you deal with this larger problem now of trying to bring about that integration? Cleaning up, for example, as you rightly said, the bunch of bad ideas that is perpetuating policy. How do you deal with that? These are some of the challenges, for example, that your talk provoked this evening. You have any responses for that? Not too long, just a minute, 2.5 minutes. All right, so, but that's something to think about, right, yes. That's in the crosstalk. So it was an honor this evening to have this lecture delivered by you. And on behalf of the department, through the executive management of the University of the West Indies KFO campus, represented here by the principal, Professor Clive Landis, we would like to express our sincere thanks to the Emmanuel family for giving us the privilege and honor of naming this lecture series in his memory. And we also want to be mindful of showing appreciation to Dr. Maishi Emmanuel. And we continue to commend your family for graciously consenting through you for setting the stage with personal reflections of your beloved father for us here at the UWI to think on the life of a distinguished Grenadian, the late Dr. Patrick Emmanuel. As always, every year a planning committee formalizes the preparation for the realization of this lecture. This year, we were enveloped in the preparation of 2 significant milestones: the planning of the Faculty of Social Sciences Conference to mark the 50th anniversary of its foundation, and that of the 20th anniversary of this lecture series. Both events require detailed planning, and we really have to thank Ms. Teresita Cox, our departmental acting administrative assistant over here, Stan Terry. She's the chief engineer in the engine room and must be commended for her unwavering support in coordinating and fine-tuning all the administrative details of both the conference and this lecture. And to the acting head of department, Dr. Lana Griffith, she gave us the latitude and space to plan both events, offering thoughtful advice and inputs where and when necessary in an effortless, open, collegial environment. This is deeply appreciated. I wish to thank my colleagues, Dr. O'Shane Springer, for ably chairing this meeting, and Dr. George Brathwaite for his assistance in enabling a calm and considered approach towards seeing the reality of this evening. And of course, we also thank Mark Combs for providing the requisite supporting services in streaming this event live for Professor Marshall's family to see it online, and for his thoughts to be archived as well for future generations to have access. I would also like to thank Mr. Joel Devonish, the esteemed panelist, for serenading us this evening with his renditions of relaxing music to calm our thoughts from a very demanding day. We started from 9 o'clock this morning. And now cometh the man of the hour, Professor Don Marshall, Director and University Director of Salisis, our featured speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, no duty is more urgent than that of returning thanks. And we are fortunate to have had him in sharing his valuable insights through an engaging conversation. Professor Marshall this evening regaled us with his thoughts in a very thought-provoking lecture, like the expert speaker that he is, interspersed with his thorough understanding and a call for a critical re-examination of the epistemological foundations of the Academy. My role here is not to repeat what was said already, but he raised a number of important considerations for us to stop and consider what we do within the Academy, and this was raised again this morning in the plenary session. I thank you, Professor Marshall, for the ideational approach that you always use in your analysis. And finally, I wish to express my appreciation to our esteemed guests, both in person and online, who have taken time out to share in this celebratory occasion with us. Your presence has added an extra spark to this event and made it even more special as we look forward to your continued support and participation each year in making this event worthwhile. Because of your presence, the family, the department, faculty, and the university remains motivated and encouraged to celebrate the intellect of a regional son of the soil. Ladies and gentlemen, have a pleasant evening, and refreshments will be provided after for everyone. We do this again next year.